right from the start, and we'll be back in chapter 6 tonight, and we'll pick up in about verse 12 or 13, I think, as we are moving into the story of the flood. And tonight we're going to take a look at Noah's Ark and some of the things about it, some of the characteristics about it. Noah's Ark in the secular world is considered a myth by many people. Unfortunately, many people who claim to be Bible-believing Christians don't believe in the story of Noah's Ark. They don't believe that the Ark existed. In fact, the secular viewpoint is that the flood either never happened or that it was just a conglomeration of more ancient stories that were all put together and so forth and written down in the Hebrew Scriptures. Every major ancient culture in the world has some type of ancient flood story of coming flood as a judgment from God or from the gods as they understood it. It was like usually one man and his family built a boat, put a lot of animals on the boat, and survived the flood. These are common things you find throughout the world in flood stories. Babylonians had ones called the Gilgamesh epic and so forth. I believe it was the Mayans had a ancient flood account that in many ways is remarkably similar to that of the Bible. The Chinese had one that's striking similarities to the biblical account and so forth. Unfortunately, many people don't believe in the story of Noah's Ark and the worldwide flood. I personally do, because I think there's abundant evidence in our physical world that testifies to the fact that the world at one time was covered by floodwater, and that the sediment layers we see were rapidly laid down in a worldwide flood. So, Noah's Ark. Many people don't believe that you could build a boat big enough to hold all those animals and all their food and all those things for a year. So these are some of the things we're going to look at and talk about tonight. As a matter of fact, and this is interesting, it just so happened to coincide with this particular time. Thursday night, we have been invited to you always hear about going to one of those private screenings for some film coming out. We've been invited to a private screening. Remember us telling you about our friend Aaron Judkins who went on the Ararat expedition? The movie's finally coming out. So anyway, Thursday night we're going to one of those kind of ritzy theaters in Dallas, and private screening. So anyway, that'll be an interesting deal. But
got your tuxedo on?
well, and what we thought about, we may have to wear tuxes and all that kind of stuff. So anyway, but we're excited for Aaron. Aaron Judkins has worked many years, a lot of study. And he spent a lot of his own money and time and work to do the archaeological work that he has. And he's really sacrificed a lot. And he really sacrificed a lot on the Everest expedition. So we're looking forward to that. And as soon as the movie comes out, and we'll kind of pass along the information of if it's going to be showing around here somewhere. If not, I'm sure we'll have a copy of it once it's available. We'll watch it here or something. So, let's get into our study tonight, Noah's Ark. In Genesis chapter 6, I forgot to put that in the slide. Genesis chapter 6, verse 13. God said unto Noah, the end of all flesh is come before me, for the earth is filled with violence through them. And behold, I will destroy them with the earth. Last week we talked about one of the reasons why the earth was corrupt. why it was filled with violence. From Cain all the way through, there had developed a culture of revenge and retaliation, as evidenced by some of the quotes that some of these men made there in the early chapters about retribution being taken on them for murdering somebody or killing somebody. They were afraid of it. So that's one of the reasons that the world was filled with violence. It was also corrupt. The earth itself corrupt because of the innocent blood that had been spilled in the earth and so forth. Which, I'm sure Abel's blood was not the only innocent blood that cried out to God. He saw these things, and the earth itself became corrupt. So God told Noah, the end of all flesh has come before me, for the earth is filled with violence through them, and behold, I will destroy them with the earth. Now, Noah knew that judgment was coming because Enoch, his great-grandfather, Enoch, Methuselah, Lamech, Noah, his great-grandfather was the one who prophesied, behold, the Lord's coming with 10,000 of His saints to execute judgment on the ungodly. So they knew judgment was coming. And Methuselah and Lamech, they knew it. They spoke it too. Noah, he knew that, and he told the people. He preached it too. Judgment is coming on the earth because of its violence, because of its corruption, and so forth. Now, these men didn't know what God was going to do to deliver any of them. They didn't even know that God would deliver them. As far as they were concerned, up until the point where God spoke to Noah and told him about the ark and the flood coming, they may have thought that when judgment comes, we're all going to get caught up in the same judgment with the rest of the earth, just like everybody else. They may not have known there was going to be any deliverance. And what they didn't know until God told Noah was that God was going to completely destroy the entire earth, the whole surface of the earth, and every living thing on it. So this is what God told Noah, and why He was going to do it. He's going to destroy them with the earth. Now, here's another thing. I'm going to go ahead and bring this up since we're right here. These things, let me go ahead and go to the... Well, let me back up. I don't want to go there yet. God told Noah what He was going to do. He said, I'm going to destroy the earth because of its violence and corruption. And then began to go into directions about the ark. This is another illustration of one of the things we've brought out in this Bible study. And that is how that through the Bible, there are different sets of good news. There are different gospels through the Bible. This was the gospel to Noah. This was God's message to him. And this is what he was supposed to believe, and this is what he was supposed to do. And because he followed God's instructions, he was counted as a righteous man. Noah didn't know anything about Jesus dying on the cross and being raised from the dead. He didn't know anything about that. Abraham didn't know anything about that. The covenant was God's gospel to him. So this is the gospel, the good news, the news from God to Noah. So this illustrates one other thing, that there are different gospels in the Bible. That's why it's so important that we understand right division. To understand what gospel applies to people today. The gospel that applies to people today is that one that Paul made clear in 1 Corinthians 15, where he said, moreover, I preach to you tell you the gospel that I preached unto you, how that Christ died for our sins, He was buried, He rose again from the dead. That's the gospel for us today. The gospel of reconciliation to God through the death of His Son, hope of eternal life through His resurrection. Now, the gospel to Noah, that won't save anybody today. That was for them then. It was specifically to them. So, you could believe what God said to Noah, and that's not going to save you. Just the gospel for today. We've talked about this before, and a lot of places you get burned at the stake for saying this, but the gospel that Jesus preached will not save you. Because remember, He preached John and Jesus preached the same gospel. It said, repent, for the kingdom is at hand. That applied to Israel, because the kingdom was for them. And, you know, he was calling out the believing remnant of Israel. And so when Paul came in, he brought opened up the mystery of Christ, the gospel of the death, burial, and resurrection of Christ. That's what's in effect today. So anyway, just wanted to point that out. This is an illustration of that principle. All right. Then God begins to give Noah some instructions. Make thee an ark of gopher wood. Ark basically just means a box. It means the same thing when God told Moses to make the Ark of the Covenant. Same thing. Just basically a box. Rectangular shaped box. Make thee an ark of gopher wood. Rooms shalt thou make in the ark, and shalt pitch it within and without with pitch. And this is the fashion which thou shalt make it of. The length of the ark shall be 300 cubits, the breadth of it 50 cubits, and the height of it 30 cubits. I know y'all probably all know that, but a cubit is like from your from your elbow to your fingertips. Now that could vary in length depending on the size of the person, but generally it was pretty much about the same, anywhere from 18 to 20 inches. And somebody showed me some measurement thing about a man's. Is that you? Like, no matter who, I don't know if it's the same on women, but on men, if you measure like from the crease of your arm to your wrist, it's like 10 inches or something like that. No matter who you are, it's the same. So that's a crazy thing. But anyway, so that's about what a cubit is. So the ark was big, and is it the same as your shoe size? Oh, really? That's interesting. Almost as though we were designed by somebody. All right, and he said, a window shalt thou make to the ark, and in a cubit shalt thou finish it above, and the door of the ark shalt thou set in the side thereof, with lower, second, and third stories shalt thou make it. Now, most people, we have this image of Noah's Ark. A little boat there with animals and giraffes sticking out and all this kind of stuff. But is this what it really looked like? I mean, most of the artwork you see of Noah's Ark, it looks like a big boat with a house sitting on the top, But if you look at the instructions, and this is one of the things, years ago, one of the things that kind of got me interested in Noah's flood and finding out the truth about Noah's Ark and the flood, because I look at all the drawings and artwork and things that are supposed to be Noah's Ark, and then I would read in here in chapter 6 what we're reading tonight about the description of the ark, and I would think, that's something doesn't add up here. That's not the shape of a boat, And then I don't remember, to tell you the truth, whether I really realized this or not, but it was kind of one of those things that came to me when I went to work on the waterfront. We handled a lot of barges, and as soon as the first time that barges came in, it was like that to me. I said, "That's it. That's Noah's Ark." It was built like a barge, basically like that, long, rectangular barge. In I don't know, West Point, MIT, some like naval school or somewhere, they got this big water simulation tank. Well, project the students were supposed to do was to come up with the most stable hull design for a marine vessel that they could possibly come up with. So they did all the mathematical figures and they did experiments and all that kind of stuff. Want to take 3 guesses? Which one was the most stable vessel hull design that they came up with? Yep, that's it right there. A barge like that, and specifically the dimensions that are given for Noah's Ark is the most stable design for a vessel that you could find. Now, Noah's Ark didn't have any sails, didn't have any rudder, had no directional equipment. There was no way to steer it or anything. All it did was just float, just like a barge. That's what it's a big, long, rectangular box. And it's amazing how stable these things are. Down here, this is a model of one of Christopher Columbus's ships, the Pinta, Nina, and Santa Maria, just kind of for a size comparison. And this is a railroad boxcar over here model. The Ark would hold something like 1,500 railroad boxcars. A boxcar, any railroad car is designed to haul about 100 tons of cargo. Generally what a normal boxcar will hold. But in size, it would hold about 1,500 boxcars. So that's a lot of freight trains, of stuff that it would hold. So also, there's one thing we want to remember, and we'll talk a little more about the animals in a second, but that as the animals were divided into kinds, we see in the animal world a lot of different variations of the same animal. Well, in Noah's day, the animals probably hadn't adapted or spread into the different species of the same kind of animal. There may have been one breed of dog, one breed of cat, and so on like that. So there weren't millions and millions of animals that had to go into the ark. Some estimates, I think we've got it in here, about 16,000 animals they may have had to have in there. Plus, even back in those days with the larger sizes of the animals and possible dinosaurs they took on there, which may have been, young. The larger ones may have been younger, so they weren't as big. Still, even today, the average size of animals in the world is about the size of a sheep. So, it wasn't like they were all elephants in there. But, if you look at the instructions, Noah's Ark was constructed like a barge. It wasn't built like a ship with the bow and stuff. Now, what exactly is gopher wood? Does it have anything to do with gophers? Probably not. I just saw that crazy picture of a gopher. I didn't put it on there. Gopher wood. Now, some believe that gopher wood was a construction method of laminating the wood. This probably looks familiar from the trip to the museum. This is Dr. Ball's Ark model there at the Creation Evidence Museum of Texas in Glen Rose. And I'm sure you noticed, in fact, we talked about it some there when we were looking at this model, how that it's built in laminated strips of wood. And the word gopher there in the Hebrew means to house in. So Dr. Ball's theory has been this is like 40-year lifetime project for him to finally get completed. He believes that the gopher wood was a process, not so much just a type of wood. And that could have been cypress, could have been oak, or it could have been some particular kind of wood. But he believes that it was a laminating process, that this wood was basically glued together with the same pitch that they sealed it with. And they believe, in fact there's samples of it there, a kind of a birch bark type of rosin pitch sealer glue. It's very incredibly strong, long-lasting, durable glue. So it's a pretty good theory. There's no really any way to know for sure what gopher wood means, but it very well could have been, a laminating process or something like that. Building that kind of a vessel out of wood, it stands to reason that would have been part of the construction of it.
I am curious.
Go ahead.
All those animals, how in the world could you have fed, watered, made sure that everything was clean for so many animals? How could you maintain all those? I mean, I understand they were there for a good while and they were able to survive, but how do you maintain the integrity of the boat with all the hygiene and stuff? How would you have done that?
Well, here, I'm glad you asked that question. Because, okay, we get the picture that, they were able to keep everything clean and they just kind of floated around out there. The Ark was designed as a survival tool. They survived the flood. and that's all they did. The ark was a hot, humid, stinking mess. I guarantee you. With all those animals in there, and only 8 people to see to everything and clean up and all that stuff, it wasn't good. This was no pleasure cruise. You know, it wasn't a Carnival Cruise Line, I guarantee you. It was hard and tough, and for a lot of the time that they were out there, for probably the first half of that year, the sea was very rough. You know, there were tsunami waves, there were probably massive storms, hurricanes, and so I'm sure they were tossed around and, you know, thrown around and everything. So when it came down to it, they just survived. I guarantee you, when they got to the end of that year, those people and those animals were so ready to get out of that box, they couldn't stand it, you know. And, you know, I know, like, our friend Aaron's been up the mountain. There are a lot of people that are convinced that Noah's Ark is up there. I'm thinking when they came out of that thing, they probably set it on fire and burned it, you know, because they were so sick of it. So that's one of the things, and this just all the years that I've studied about Noah's Ark and the flood and everything. Here's just a while back, this struck me that, you know, that was a survival tool. It was designed to do one thing: preserve their lives, and it worked. Now, I believe, you know, there was supernatural protection. God watched over them, but, you know, if he was just going to supernaturally preserve them, he could have just scooped them up in his hands and held them up in the air, you know, for a year for the flood. No. He had them do all this work, gather all that stuff, put all that food in there and all that kind of stuff for them. And so, the food, there are some really interesting studies on just exactly that. There's a guy named John Wood-Morappy. He wrote a book on the feasibility of Noah's Ark, having all those animals in there, water, food, cleanup, and all that stuff. Most of the stuff he wrote in his book, it's a good book, way over my head. And I mean, it's really, he goes into some deep scientific studies on all this stuff, feasibility studies. And the bottom line is that, yeah, it's very possible that they would have been able to store enough food for the animals and been able to feed them. Actually, I think it's in his book, he believes that a lot of their waste, they processed that, kind of like composted it or something, and, you know, food for the birds or something. But anyway.
Does it say they put food in the ark? Maybe the Lord,
yeah.
Maybe the Lord provided manna.
Yeah, it's, no. I don't know if I've got to that. Let's see if we... no, I haven't got to that verse yet. You just, we'll look at that in a second. Okay, go for wood. We'll answer that specific question that's in there. How big was Noah's Ark? Here's kind of a drawing. This is out of Walt Brown's book. Another book, if one of the best books on young Earth creation evidence, Noah's flood, things like that, is Walt Brown's book, In the Beginning by Walter Brown, PhD. Great book. Another one is, in fact, I meant to bring that case of books, the Evolution Handbook. We've got a lot of those. We buy them to give away, so I need to bring those. If you don't have one, you need to have one of those books. You may not be able to read this. Took this out of Walt Brown's book. It talks about, here's kind of a drawing of the ark inside a football stadium, how big it would be. And so generally it would have been about anywhere about 500 feet long, about 75 feet wide, 45 feet tall. So it was huge, big barge.
You know, it's interesting because we've been talking earlier here about how in the environment, how the people were bigger.
Yeah.
And so is that 1.5 based on current? You know,
well,
see, if we were bigger, it could have been maybe not twice, but 1/3 more.
Yeah.
So those cubits, so that boat may have been bigger
Right.
than what
right.
they estimate here. I mean, if it's based on just
Yeah,
a modern man, you know.
There's been some studies on
Yeah.
that, and they've estimated the Ark with the longer cubit size,
Yeah.
considering that people were probably bigger then,
Yeah.
and, according to the cubit size.
So that means more
yeah,
food?
It could have been, yeah.
Yeah, more
you know,
food that
more
could add
food
on
and
there for
everything.
take care of them.
And, two,
Yeah.
all right, we can consider, and I've heard this, and it could be true about the food. A lot of the animals that they had on the ark were milk producers, like the cows, the goats. Those were all, and I don't know the sheep, but the cows and the goats. And remember, there were 7 of each of those, because they were clean animals. So the only animals that were there in pairs, male and female, were the unclean animals. So the clean are the cattle animals, cows, sheep, goats. There were more of them, and they may have produced enough milk for the people and maybe some of the other animals. But anyway, it was pretty big, about 500 feet, 75 feet wide, 45 feet tall, or somewhere in that neighborhood. Another quote from Walt Brown's book: "Who held all the animals could." Noah may have had help building the ark and so forth. So here's where I got the number. There may have been about 16,000 animals in all, going by kinds of animals. Sea creatures like fish, probably whales, things like that. They could survive in the water. They were water animals, so they made it okay. There may have been some of the birds like, I don't know, geese and ducks and stuff like that can live in the water too. They may have been on the ark. They may not have been, because they can live in water. So anyway, mammals, birds, and reptiles, and humans, and a lot of the plant life probably survived because either the seeds were, floated or, were buried in the upper sediments, and as soon as the water went down, they came up. We know that happened because Noah sent out the dove, and it came back with what? An olive leaf in its mouth. Olive trees are fairly slow growing, so the plants came back apparently fairly quickly in that in the flood layer, very fertile flood layer. So for a year they could have had room for all the stuff. Plus, here's something we have to take into consideration. The type of plant species they had before the flood were probably much more nutritious and protein rich than the plant species we have now. So it may not have taken as much bulk of food to feed the animals and people for a year as what we might think. Okay, now many people, even Christians, refuse to believe the biblical account of Noah's Ark and worldwide flood. But the thing is, anybody that says that Noah's Ark was not real and Noah's flood didn't happen, they're calling Jesus a liar. So I'm going to tell you, you cannot say you're a Jesus follower and you believe His Word and not believe the biblical account of Noah's Ark and the flood. Because Jesus believed it. He said right here, but we read this last week, but as the days of Noah were, so also shall also the coming of the Son of Man be. For as in the days that were before the flood. Now, what flood is he talking about? He's talking about the worldwide flood. How do we know that? Because he says down here, eating and drinking, marrying and giving in marriage until the day that who? Noah, and that's the Greek spelling of Noah, but it's Noah, entered into what? The ark, and knew not till the flood came and took them all away, so shall it be in the coming of the Son of Man. So, Jesus believed the biblical account of Noah's Ark and the flood. So if Jesus believed it, then I think it's, we can be pretty confident that we can, believe the Noah's Ark story. And I don't back up from them making this statement, that anybody that denies the reality of Noah's Ark and the flood story, then they need to just throw their Bible away and do not claim to be a Jesus follower. Because if you deny the story of Noah and his ark and the flood, you're calling Jesus a liar. So, anyway, there. it's important that we understand these things. And it's important that we do like, we've done like we are doing. Examine the evidence to see that there's evidence to back up the biblical account. So, back to God speaking to Noah. He says, and behold, even I, do bring a flood of waters upon the earth to destroy all flesh, wherein is the breath of life from under heaven, and everything that is in the earth shall die. Every land-dwelling, air-breathing creature would die. They would not survive. So here's another thing. I think I brought this up before, but I want to make this point again. We have to remember that the flood on the earth was not just a matter of the water came and stayed there for about a year and then it all went down. No, the flood was designed to catastrophically destroy everything on the face of the earth. So whatever civilizations were there, whatever cities, whatever technology they had, roads, bridges, what buildings, everything that they had wiped away. We've got apparently one of their hammers and one of their iron pots, some other things. Some of those artifacts we found that are buried way beneath the earth in sediment layers. So they had those things. But that was the point of the flood. So we need to keep that in mind when we're thinking about the flood, is that it was designed to destroy the entire surface of the earth, which it did, and laid it back down in sediment layers. To destroy everything. Then he said, but with thee will I establish my covenant, and thou shalt come into the ark, thou and thy sons and thy wife and thy sons' wives with thee. And of every living thing of all flesh, 2 of every sort shalt thou bring into the ark, to keep them alive with thee. They shall be male and female. It's interesting, God says, with you I'll establish my covenant. And that covenant was that he would save him and his family. Basically, he's telling Noah, I'm going to destroy the earth with the flood. I want you to build an ark to save you and your family and the animal species. This is what I want you to do. If you do that, you'll be saved. You'll be preserved in your family. This is the covenant. If you don't do that, you're going to die in the judgment just like everybody else. So Noah, made the right decision. He had work to do. That was the covenant that God made with Noah. That was to Noah. Nobody else can go in and try to plug into that covenant. That covenant doesn't apply to anybody else but Noah and basically his family. They were a unique group of people for that time in the way God was dealing with them. So, a lot of people try to go and pick and choose in the Bible any kind of covenants and promises and try to apply it to people today. You can't. It was for them. All right. Bring all things of all flesh, animals, birds, and reptiles, and so forth, creeping things, into the ark, too, and so forth. Of fowls after their kind, and of cattle after their kind, of every creeping thing of the earth after his kind, 2 of every sort shall come unto thee, to keep them alive. Now, here's another thing that we commonly think of, is that Noah and his sons had to go out in all the earth and round up all the animals. No, that's not what it says. It says, 2 of every sort shall come unto thee. So God brought the animals to Noah. Put it in their minds to come down there, and there they were. They were out working on the ark. They woke up one morning, there's an elephant, or a couple of elephants standing in the yard. And then gorillas and all the other animals. Animals they probably didn't even know existed, showed up. Now, here you go, Kay. Verse 21. And take thou unto thee of all food that is eaten, and thou shalt gather it to thee, and it shall be for food for thee and for them. So it showed, he said, gather up all the food that you eat, all the food that they eat, store it in the ark. Stow it in there in the cargo hold, and it'll be food for you and them.
No fast
food.
No fast food.
No fast food.
Jack
No,
Box
all
tacos.
all slow food back in those days where they cook everything. But probably they had a lot of dried food, preserved food. I mean, they knew ways to preserve food just like we do. So they probably had it in jars and stuff and dry grains and all those kind of things to feed themselves and the animals, and, cheese and all that kind of stuff. Thus did Noah, according to all that God commanded him, so did he. So here we find, we started off God in this section, God instructing Noah, here's what I'm going to do, here's what I want you to do. That was his word for Noah. That was his gospel to Noah, his instructions to him. Now, and also the covenant that he made with him. This is my covenant I'm going to make with you. Make this ark, go in there with your family and all the animals, and you'll survive the coming flood of judgment. So that's what he did. And this tells us that thus did Noah, according to all that God commanded him, so did he. So Noah was obedient. He held up his end of the bargain. He kept his part of the covenant. And he obeyed the gospel that was given to him. See? He didn't know anything about the stuff that we know. If any of it had been written down yet, there's a lot of people that believe that these ancient patriarchs did keep written records. I believe they probably did. Even if none survived that we know of, but I believe they probably did. That was what God told him to do. That's what he did. He was counted righteous, not just because of this. We know he walked with God and so forth, but he followed God's commands.
You think Noah had a deadline or a time frame?
Well, I think so, because God had stated through, I think let's see if I can find it right quick. He had said, I'll no longer strive with man, yet the days of man will be 120 years. So that's probably an indication that God gave them a timeline, a deadline. Let's see. Chapter 6, verse 3. The Lord said, my spirit shall not always strive with man, for that he also is flesh, yet his days shall be 120 years. Now, if you take that 120 years and by looking at the most probable time that God made that statement to them, and look at the people who were alive at the time, and then how long it was from where they were until the flood, you get that's where, okay, it's different people believe different things about this, but I believe that was God saying, okay, in about 120 years the judgment is going to hit. So they had an idea of how long it was going to be from that statement from God. And when he made that statement, that was probably during the life of Lamech, Noah's father, or so forth. Not sure, have to look back at our timeline chart on the patriarch's lives. But anyway, you're talking about guys that lived to be 930, 40, 50, 60 years old. So 120 years, that's not that long for them. So they probably got on the ball. But anyway, it's likely that, God gave them a deadline. That may not be the case, but I believe it's likely that it is. So they knew they had about that amount of time. Most people that are believing Noah's flood believe, well, it took Noah about 120 years to build the ark. That could be, because as we see, Noah probably immediately got to work when God gave him the instructions to build the ark. He immediately got to work. And we know that, according to this, it was in fact 120 years later that when the ark was finished, then the flood came. So then we can kind of conjecture it took him 120 years to build the ark. Now, that's not set in stone. That's just kind of putting pieces of the puzzle together to try to get an idea of a timeline there. So, there's no other scriptures you know, anywhere else that, other than their ages, you know, it gives a, Noah was so many years old, you know, when the flood came, and it was in like the first month of Noah's 600th year and so forth like that, and you can count backwards to some other, you know, timed events and so forth, and you can put a lot of things together and get the idea that, yeah, from the time God told Noah to build the ark, it was about 120 years until the flood came. So, anyway, I think that's true. Yep. All right, so that'll finish up chapter 6. Not next week. It'll be 3 weeks away. Next week's our kind of Christmas thing, so just come and we'll have a good time. I'll probably have some slides and, you know, PowerPoint up there, slideshow to look at and stuff. And then 2 weeks we'll watch the film. It's a great film, so looking forward to that. Anybody got any questions or comments? I know with Noah's Ark stuff, we could talk about that forever. I could. So.
God made a covenant with Noah, just knowing his family. There wouldn't have been any other possibility for the rest of mankind to, you know, be involved in that, would there?
You know, we have the idea that when it started to thunder and lightning, it started to rain, the water came up, that there were people running up there beating on the ark, wanting in and all that kind of stuff. And that may have happened. But I think that by the time it got to this point, it was already past the point of no return. You know, now within that, believe that God always gives people an opportunity to repent. You know, but okay. And just because God made this covenant with Noah and with his family doesn't mean that he wouldn't have made provision for mercy for other, if somebody else had repented and turned and said, yeah, they, you know, wanted in too. Because we have to remember something God said to Moses, and even Paul mentioned it, when God said to Moses, after, you know, made the covenants and the law and all that kind of stuff, he said, I'll have mercy on whom I'll have mercy. So, I think there could have been provision for mercy for anybody that would have repented, and just because God had made the covenant with Noah, I mean, nothing was going to break that. Even if anybody else would have repented and wanted to come in, probably would have been provision for that, but that wouldn't have had anything to do, break or negate his covenant with Noah, you know. So, I think this kind of would be my perspective on it.
Well, there wasn't a real general belief in redemption at that point, was there? You know,
Well, all we have to go on,
so there's nothing up to that point that speaks to it. You know,
the only two things we have to go on there to try to, you know, answer that question. We know that it says, even during Seth's day, at that time men began to call upon the name of the Lord. So we know that especially Seth's line, they were righteous men who, you know, apparently gathered together and worshiped, made animal sacrifices. We know they made animal sacrifices. Abel did, and it was accepted. We know Noah did after the flood. He did. So that was common to them to make animal sacrifices. And as these groups of men, or might have been men and women too, probably was, but we know the men did, got together to call upon the name of the Lord and make sacrifices, somehow they had some idea of redemption. And two, there were men like Enoch and Noah that walked with God, and they were righteous men of faith. And apparently the people that knew them knew that, and they knew why they walked with God, and, you know, knew why they were considered righteous men of faith, because they walked with God. They, you know, believed God and didn't take part in all the ungodliness that was going on in the world around them. So they had to have had some pretty good understanding of redemption, but for them, apparently, it was make offerings for sin and basically believe God's word. Believe what He said, and believe not turn to idols and don't take part in the violence and ungodliness going on in the world. We have Enoch's word on that God has come with 10,000 saints to judge the ungodly. So they knew what that was, and Enoch may have just been the one that vocalized that. He wasn't the first one that knew about it. I think they knew about it all the way from Adam. Because the reason this line from Adam through Seth, Enos, Canaan, Jared, Mahalalel, all through there, the reason we have those men's names in there is because they were prophets. That was handed down as God's representative on earth. Even though Adam lost his ability to take dominion of the earth, he was still God's representative on the earth at that time. And there was like an office, a gifted office that those men had that was passed down from father to son on down. Kind of a prophet and representative of God. So they knew things and had understanding of things in their relationship with God that just aren't written down. We just, they knew it, we don't. For some reason, God didn't see fit to include those details in that account. So, but apparently they did have some probably very clear understanding of redemption for them, at that time. All right. Anybody else? All right. All right, let's pray. And we'll